So thank you very much for hanging out with us. During this session, we wanted to just give you an overview and try and clear up some of the confusion that surrounds terms and everything. So today, our plan, I think everyone knows who we are if you were at the beginning. Anne Fannon, Director of WatPD. I'm Katherine Lithgow from the Center for Teaching Excellence. Okay, and so our plan for today at this session is we wanted to look at some of the benefits and challenges that are associated with experiential learning. Why would you want to do this in the first place? And what are some of the challenges or barriers or frustrations that are stopping you from introducing experiential learning? We also wanted to talk a little bit about how experiential learning fits into the larger context nationally and internationally. We're also going to spend a bit of time looking at some definitions and some types of experiential learning. We know that there's a lot of confusion surrounding terms. You know, what does experiential learning mean to one group of people? What does it mean to another group of people? And what do some of those activities actually look like? And then we'll do a brief overview on what qualities do we have to, or what attributes do we have to pay attention to when we're designing these experiential learning opportunities. And then to get you on your way, we're going to identify some of the resources that are available to help you, think about this a little further or consider actually implementing it into some of your courses. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne.
Thanks, and I realized I was very excited and I already advanced the slides. So we're going to start with a little exercise just to get a sense of the temperature in the room, the thoughts in the room. We like a think, pair, share, so that's what we're going to do. We would like to get your thoughts on the key benefits of experiential learning and the challenges or the barriers towards engaging in experiential learning. So the way that we're going to do this is just take a few minutes to think independently, jot down some ideas, then you've got some brand new friends at your table to chat with, and then we will bring this back together as a group. One of the things that we need to consider when we're looking at experiential learning opportunities are, of course, those stakeholders, some of whom Nora identified in the beginning. So in particular, we'd love it if you could give some thought to the benefits for some of the key stakeholders, and we've limited it to students, faculty, and partners. So take a few minutes and we'll bring the group back together soon. Okay, are we ready to come back together as a group? Good conversation happening? Okay, so we were going to put this on the PowerPoint, but we've decided we're not going to futz around with that. So Katherine is going to record your thoughts. What are the benefits of experiential learning? Who wants to start? I will come to you with the mic. I know there's brave souls in here, but I won't pick on you. Okay.
I'll cover a couple that we talked about in regards to students. We talked about it giving them some skill development and even the ability to kind of see themselves in the workforce in the future, and maybe get rid of a bit of that imposter syndrome they feel. Engaging with real issues and being able to have an impact and see their impact, and being able to experience a variety in the type of learning that they have.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Scott, is that a hand? Okay, I'll go here first.
We talked about things like experimentation, confirming interest, testing theories, building self-confidence as well as resilience, and also the impact of doing something that you've only just read about. So it's more meaningful and it's more memorable. It's entrenched in your skill set.
Stefan.
Thanks. We had a number of things that we discussed, including that everyone benefits from having a different perspective, and that's true for all the groups. There's a very mercenary aspect if you're thinking of co-op, right? Students make money. It helps the university with enrollment, and employers, of course, get work out of it all. One of the things we discussed is it's also an opportunity for students to learn what they don't like, what they do like, right? It's an opportunity to explore, especially if there's a lot of different types of experiential opportunities to do. One of the benefits was there is the ability to have a linkage between curriculum and work and do things like that. And it makes students feel more engaged with their education, right? Both in terms of directing their learning in some sense and in being exposed to things that they choose. I think that was it.
Great summary. Is there anything else that anyone had that we haven't covered off yet? Any other benefits? Okay, well, that's a pretty great, oh, over here, sorry.
One thing that was brought up at our table I thought was really important from the faculty standpoint is the flip side from the student standpoint in terms of engaged students. Through experiential activities, you have engaged students, which make things that much better for those teaching those students.
From a student standpoint, we talked about the importance of building connections and starting to build their networks early so that when they go to find jobs, they already have some of those connections already.
Shall we move to our list, Catherine? So this is also a short list of benefits, and they look pretty familiar to the things that you have already identified. Did you want to go through this list, Catherine? Okay, so as we've talked about the opportunity to truly integrate theory and practice, to take concepts that they've only read about or heard about and put them into practice, develop employability skills. We use that very broadly to reference whether that is time management, communication, teamwork skills, or specific technical skills that they'll need for a career. Increased academic and career clarity, what you want to study further, what you might want to do, and definitely what you don't want to do, and building networks. From the faculty perspective, we've talked about increased student engagement, that it is a rewarding experience to see the development and the learning from students engaged in these experiences. For faculty, there's also an opportunity to build networks and partnerships directly when they're working directly with the community partner, and a good way to keep current as to what's happening in one specific industry or field.
And just wanted to touch on that employability skills. A lot of people sometimes sort of cringe at, the word employment or employability, but actually the very skills that employability covers, as Anne talks about, are the very skills that we say that our graduates will have, and they're outlined in the undergraduate degree level expectations. So things like teamwork, leadership, conflict management, critical thinking, all of those things are covered under employability. In terms of the partnerships, it not only fosters collaborations for you, but it's again a network. You can invite these people into your classroom, as guest lecturers. So there's, an opportunity for you to sort of enrich your class as well. So.
And then we also had a list of some of the benefits for community or industry partners. So they have the opportunity to build connections with campus. For many of them, engagement with students in these types of work-integrated learning or experiential opportunities provides them with a talent pipeline. We hear quite often from community and industry partners about the value of bringing student perspectives into the workplace and having those fresh eyes and new questions that haven't been asked. And then the development of staff, and this is something that came up in the research of one of our colleagues from New Zealand in particular, that quite often junior staff members will supervise students as their first supervisory experience, and that's an incredibly rewarding developmental experience for those staff. And in doing so, an institution or an organization has to sort of ask questions about everything from documentation through to process, and explaining their work to an outsider really helps to identify some strengths and some gaps in that work. So, lots of good reasons to consider, a question, yes?
I just wanted to expand a little bit more on the talent pipelining because I come from industry. So My experience is students can bring really great short-term resources to businesses if they have a short-term project, those projects that keep getting put on the back burner, or they need an extra set of hands. So it's a really, it can be really beneficial to the business from a short-term capacity, but then as businesses are currently struggling with finding talent, or they will be struggling with finding talent, a good part of a talent strategy is connecting with post-secondary students, so building the future talent pipeline. And then finally, if businesses can engage with students, and they can start influencing and helping those students develop the skills and experience of the future workforce that they're going to be drawing from. So if you've heard businesses say, you know, they just don't have the skills that I need when they graduate, then trying to get businesses on board with helping to develop those skills and experience will then close the gap in terms of what employers need and what students have when they graduate.
Thanks, that was a beautiful synopsis. Any other comments on benefits?
For students and for industry, I think intercultural competence is raised, especially when you look at the makeup of students here at UW. We've got quite a representation of different international communities here. So students come with expectations. They learn by going and working in the industry what it's really like to work in Canada rather than from what they've read or what they've heard, and vice versa for employers as well.
Thanks so much. That's a really great point, and it's something that we've been talking about at the federal level as well, that we see international students as a critical component for Canada's future workforce. And so bringing international students here and giving them experiential or work-integrated learning opportunities while they're students is a great way for them to develop some capacity and some experience in a Canadian context, and might mean they're more likely to want to stay in Canada and be a strong part of our future workforce. So, any other comments? Okay, so clearly lots of benefits. I'm sure you didn't have too much difficulty writing down some of the challenges associated with experiential. So, is there anyone that's willing to start that conversation? I'll go here first and then back here.
So at our table, we talked about it being really time intensive. A lot of these experiential learning opportunities are amazing, but behind that, there's a lot of support that has to go into it. We also talked about getting the right partners with these experiential learning opportunities. So sometimes it's challenging to find who those right partners are, and even difficulty finding them. And then also getting faculty to actually do experiential learning initiatives within the classroom. It can be really hard to even know where to start.
Hi everyone, I'm Danielle O'Neill. I'm the Assistant VP at the Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs Office. Just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm actually tasked with growing experiential learning at the grad level. So just in terms of the challenges there are kind of three. One is the terminology, so the overall umbrella term of work integrated learning. That's a really hard sell for me with faculty that are much more focused on its relationship to research and growing those, even if a student isn't going into academia. So that's one thing. Two, a huge issue I think is going to be the legal aspects. When you're talking about experiential learning opportunities that especially fall outside of co-op, we have faculty working 2 months on agreements. The legal office is overloaded. They're not getting help. They give up. They're not going to keep doing that. And there's no help for them and nothing to sort of support these agreements if you even know what they're supposed to look like or anything. And the third I would just say is also what I've encountered in my few months now in this position is that there's still this perception that, well, faculty should just go out and, or students, and find, you know, an industry partner and them will help you. Well, that's just a non-starter right there because they don't know how to do that. So I'm really pinning my faith on things like JEDI that has, you know, that they're, and helping them to understand that, no, that's the problem. Like, that needs to be, faculty can certainly tell you what industries might be relevant or where the research might be relevant, but that's pretty much where it ends. And students don't have any better idea either. So those are three things, and I think Russ, you had one as well, right? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Thanks, Daniela. Tag team. The one I had was in relation to paid and unpaid. So some forms of work integrated learning or experiential education are paid, such as co-op, and some forms might be unpaid. And that can cause conflict among the students when they're actually working in the same environment. We do come across it now and again in co-op, and we try and eradicate it very quickly when we do, but it would be something we really need to be mindful of, because it can also spill over the relationship with the employer.
And maybe quickly, before we move on to additional challenges, Danielle, would you mind giving, Daniela, sorry. Would you mind giving the group a really quick overview of JEDI, which is an acronym some of us know, but I don't know that everyone does, and they're probably very intrigued right now.
Well, it's not Star Wars, but I'm trying to remember what it stands for, actually. Global Entrepreneurship and Disruptive Innovation, which is, you know, a mouthful. But it's pretty new. So I just found out about it not too long ago. It's out of the Office of Research, and there are two people right now sort of tasked with, I mean, I think the goal is to help facilitate these industry partnerships, especially for MyTax and others, but it's pretty early days. And my example was taken from just having them saying, well, we've got to help faculty understand this process. And so they said, okay, well, we'll make up, you know, a set of steps. And the very first step was, well, identify your industry partner and come to us. So I was like, well, then you didn't understand what I was saying. They don't know how to, you know, how would we know how to do that? We don't have those connections, many of us, especially I come from psychology, so especially in the arts end of campus, that's not familiar territory for a lot of people.
Great, thank you. Yes, Stetton, challenges.
So I just have one, and it's for a lot of departments, it's very difficult to integrate anything experiential with what they're doing from a curriculum perspective.
So Katherine would like you to expand on that.
To expand on it, well, take my department, physics. We're physicists. All of us have been in a university environment forever, and there's this whole funny world, right, that we don't really understand. And so to actually incorporate any of that into anything that we do from a day-to-day perspective is quite difficult, right?
Thanks, that's really helpful. Other challenges? Yes.
As a host, and a nonprofit, you know, there's a lot of time and expense involved in onboarding somebody, getting them trained, and sometimes somebody comes, oh, we only have a 20-hour placement for you, and do I want to invest 10 hours on, you know, that kind of thing. And then while we'd love to have students, sometimes it's like giving the skills to those supervisors to know. So if there is some kind, you know, we don't have to get a lot of, here, this is what you need to do, because we don't want to add to the workload of our currently hardworking staff.
Great, thank you. That's a really important perspective. Any other, oh yes, lots of challenges.
What I thought of was some students may be lacking the skills that might need to be in place to support their learning. And so if they're coming, again, I think that speaks to whoever's supervising them and the host needing to invest time in that. And so how do you strike that right balance of challenging students so they can grow, but at the same time not putting them in the deep end? And another one was there may be some logistical or cultural challenges or conflicts students might have depending on the work or the experience that they're undertaking. How do they get there? If it's unpaid, how are they financing that? And yeah, what work are they doing? How does that align with their own beliefs?
Thank you. And there was a hand over here.
So my name's Alison Mitchell. I'll introduce myself. I work with the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, and I'm working on an initiative in collaboration with the University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier, and Conestoga College my role is to connect with small businesses to help make it easier for them to connect with post-secondary students for co-op and non-co-op experiential learning. So some of my challenges come from an industry standpoint in terms of I've been having a lot of conversations with small businesses, and certainly time and financial resources are definitely constraints. Some of the other things that have come up is they didn't even know that they could connect with post-secondary students. So some of my role has been about educating the small business community. Some of them really want to work with post-secondary students, but have no idea what kind of work to give a student. So it's about talking about some of those projects. And they have no idea how to connect. So that's where my role's coming in a little bit with this pilot, is helping kind of bridge that gap. But in my role, if I am going to the schools to try and understand what co-op opportunities might be available for an employer, that's fairly easy because the co-op programs are well established. When I'm looking for some non-co-op opportunities like an in-class project or a placement, those are where I'm finding challenges, where I can't find kind of one place to find all this stuff. I'm having to go back and forth to a lot of people. So trying to engage the business community in some of those non-co-op opportunities, if they had to do it themselves, they wouldn't, because it takes too much time.
Thanks so much. Any other last comments on challenges before we move on?
Tying in with Ross's comment about pay versus not paid and a quality perspective, where depending on the kind of work experience or experiential education, if it's money that needs to come out of the student's pocket to be able to engage in that particular activity, there may be some students who are unable to access that because they don't have the means. So the resources can be a giant umbrella, but dollars, time, space, equipment, and access from an equity point of view, I think, are very important challenges that need to be overcome.
Great, thank you. Oh, yes, one more.
Hi, Dana from Co-op. I oversee a lot of our job development activity. And I think this isn't a challenge we can't overcome, but as experiential learning grows and develops across Canada, and the variety of ways that employers can engage with the student in the workplace, we're not going out and just saying, we want to tell you about our co-op program anymore. It's like, if you want to hire a student from the University of Waterloo, you can do so in this way, and this way, and this way, and this way. So I think we have to face the challenge of ensuring we don't confuse industry and our employers. We need to work together to do that, and I love the work that CWIL's doing on that, and EWO and others. But I think that model that we've been able to kind of be our steadfast model has changed and is changing, and we need to just think about that as we go out. Because when we were talking here, the difference between even in one work environment, having a paid and an unpaid student sitting side by side doing similar work. One gets a supervisor visit, one does not. One is a 12-week term, one is a 4-week term. And where's the equity and the support systems in that? So all those sorts of things, that it can be confusing for the employer, so I think.
Great, thank you. Okay, Katherine, should we pull up our list of challenges? I think they've hit them. I think we've covered challenges.
Great, thanks. I'm gonna, you can't really see over here. Are we on? Yep. So I think you've covered some. There's the, again, advanced planning. A lot of these initiatives, you might have to plan like 8 months in advance. It's not something that you can just do sort of the term before. So there's that, the preparation required. Having clearly articulated outcomes. It's one thing to send a student out for an experiential learning opportunity, but if the student doesn't know what the outcomes or what the expectations are, and you aren't really clear about what these outcomes are, again, that can lead to a lot of confusion for the student, for yourself, for the industry partner. We've mentioned all the additional time and resources. Often, it's not a controlled situation, so you have to be able to deal with some of the unpredictability of the situations, and how are you going to make that experience still a meaningful one for the students. And I think we mentioned a lot of about the logistics. So, did we have any other ones? I'm not sure. No. Okay, so we talked a lot about, what the value is, and now Anne's going to just take us through a timeline here of.
So I'm a history girl, so this kind of thing excites me, and I like to put things in their context. So just a few things that have been happening in the national and provincial space that are important to consider as we think about experiential learning and sort of where the country is headed. So let's go back to 1957, where the University of Waterloo is the first school in Canada to open with a co-op program that takes off very, very quickly and expands across the institution. As Katherine mentioned, the University of Waterloo also added an undergraduate degree level expectation related specifically to experiential learning. That's how important we believe it to be to this institution. And then in the space in the past couple of years, there's been just a lot of action with this notion of experiential education or work-integrated learning more specifically, and its important role in developing a talent pool for the future. So you may or may not be familiar with the Business Higher Education Roundtable. It's a consortium of 7 university presidents, 7 college presidents, and 7 of Canada's CEOs. I think it's about 13 CEOs now, but they started like that. And they have set a goal that 100% of post-secondary students in Canada will have a work-integrated learning experience by the time that they graduate. And they are working really closely with major industries to advance that goal. So as an example, within the financial services sector in Toronto, they're working to create 10,000 new opportunities. I think, what's the timeline, Judy? 10 years? 5 years? 2 years? Something like that. They're looking to create 10,000 new opportunities. There's an advanced manufacturing consortium that is also working towards this. And the federal government in 2016 as well, I missed that one, put in $73 million, which is a drop in the federal budget bucket, but towards increasing work-integrated learning opportunities for students and providing some wage subsidies to employers to take students into the workplace. We expect that funding to grow in the next budget. So budget 2019, we expect to see an expansion of that program to students in all disciplines from STEM, where it started, and to look at providing more opportunities, particularly for not-for-profit organizations to access those funds. In our province, in Ontario, you may be familiar with the Premier's Highly Skilled Workforce Task Force. They released a report in 2016 that had a recommendation that every post-secondary student have an experiential learning opportunity by the time that they graduate. And as Nora alluded to in the presentation, this has caused a bit of confusion when it comes to terminology. What is experiential learning? What is experiential learning as the Ministry of back then, Advanced Education and Skills Development, now Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, defines it, and then what is work-integrated learning from there. So we'll revisit some of that and some of those definitions in a second. In 2017, the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities released what they were calling the Career Ready Fund. That was $68 million distributed across the post-secondary sector for experiential learning opportunities to be created in post-secondary and also for new partnerships to be created between industry and community. So that matters to us because that is certainly the funding that is funding today's event and many of the other initiatives that we're working on. We have absolutely no direction from the new government as to how the focus on experiential may change and what this means moving forward. But the good news is we've secured the funds, so we're going to keep on keeping on until we get some new direction. So I will pass. Do you want me to do this one, Katherine? Yeah. So Nora referenced this earlier, so I won't belabor it, but just to go back to that point that Experiential learning, particularly in the post-secondary sector, has a very broad definition and interpretation, usually meaning hands-on direct experience for students. The ministry really did muddy the waters by creating a definition of experiential that kind of looks like work integrated learning, but adds a few pieces into it. And then there are some really specific definitions of work integrated learning and forms of work integrated learning. And we will try not to bore you, but we will give you an overview of some of those definitions right now.
So over the next few minutes, what I want to do is just go through some of the definitions. And the reason for that is there is a lot of confusion about these terms. And so what I'm going to do is start out by giving you a broad definition of what experiential learning is. So that will encompass sort of everything that's in this, in the first circle. Then we're going to start narrowing in on what did the ministry say or define as experiential learning, because when you're looking at any of the resources that the government puts out, it's a little bit different than the yellow circle, which is work integrated learning. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that is, and then we'll go in and give a specific definition on one of the pieces, the co-op. What is co-op education? So, and we won't be addressing really the co-curricular or the extracurricular. The next one. Okay, so the first one I wanted to talk about was the broad definition. So this one is put out by the Association for Experiential Education. And to make things even more confusing, you'll probably hear us talk about experiential learning and experiential education. And so the way that I differentiate is experiential learning can take place just in everyday life. Something happens to me, I reflect on it, I learn from it. When I talk about experiential education, I'm usually looking at something that's much more structured. It's from a program or a course, and an instructor is facilitating or intentionally planning this experiential learning. It involves some kind of preparation for the students, and it usually has a little bit of a reflective, it should have a reflective component, but it's a more structured environment. But we are probably using the terms pretty much interchangeably. So experiential education, as defined by the Experiential Education Association, it's a philosophy. It informs the methodologies which educators purposely engage with learners. The key point here is it's a direct experience, and it's linked with focused reflection. I find in a lot of the work that I do, we're very good at giving students opportunities, but maybe a little bit weak on having them take the time to reflect on what that learning actually means to them and what they've learned from it. And the reason that we have them undertake this is to increase the knowledge, develop skills, clarify value, and just develop people's capacity to contribute to their communities. In our handouts, one of them is the University of Victoria handout. Let me just see. So that's this one. On there, I'm not going to go through it, but what it does is provide a really nice, comprehensive list of the kinds of education, experiential learning. Not only does it give you definitions, but if you were interested in incorporating experiential education into your course, you might want to take a look at that list, and it might give you some ideas for the kinds of activities that are more suited for your course. Okay. Yes.
Yes, so we will ensure there was an attendance list going around, and we will email an electronic copy to everyone that's in the room.
Yes. And again, these are the kinds of resources that we're hoping to be adding to a website so that you'll be able to have access to them. The next thing I wanted to talk about is when the Ministry of Training, Colleges and University put together the definition, it was actually under the other government, previous government, so it was the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Development. What they did was basically give a definition of work integrated learning, but they added a few pieces. They said it doesn't actually have to be in the workplace, it could be a simulated workplace. And then they really tied it to the development of employability skills. So again, this is just some of the criteria that they're looking for when they talk about experiential learning. They're looking for things that have authentic demands. So you might have your students do something that it takes place in the workplace, but maybe it's not under the same time constraints, or it doesn't have the same consequences if they fail. So that is a little bit of a difference. The experience is structured, purposeful, and meaningful activity. They're able to apply their university or college program knowledge and employability skills. It includes some kind of self-assessment on the part of the student, and the evaluation of the student's performance or learning outcomes takes place by a third party. It's not the instructor, it's somebody beyond the classroom. And again, this experience counts, is formally recognized. It's either given credit or valued in some way by the university. Then our next, thanks, Anne.
So just very briefly to talk about the specific form of experiential learning that is work-integrated learning. So we're kind of moving in on the egg here, as I like to call it. And I just want to note that it really is, I think, as you look at these definitions, increased specificity. So I don't want to privilege one form of experiential over another. I think they're all incredibly valuable experiences for our students. Work-integrated learning takes the concept of experiential learning and adds in an element that there is a third party engaged. So that could be a host organization where the student comes into the industry, into the organization, or it could be where industry is coming into the classroom and giving the project, the students a real world project that they're working on. It's not specified in the definition here, but I like to think about it as the student in that experience is creating some form of work product that is advancing the mission of the host organization or association. So the relationship in work-integrated learning goes beyond the instructor-student relationship for the actual work that's being done. Our National Association has just endorsed a definition of work-integrated learning. So it's as follows: a model and process of curricular experiential education, which formally and intentionally integrates a student's academic studies within a workplace or practice setting. As I mentioned, WIL experiences include an engaged partnership of at least an academic institution, a host organization, and a student, and that WIL can occur at the course or program level and includes the development of learning outcomes related to employability, personal agency, and lifelong learning. And in your handout, there are 9 definitions, 9 forms of work-integrated learning that are recognized by the National Association, and you can read about their definitions. And so we're Waterloo, so you can't talk about work-integrated learning without talking about co-op. This is not a comprehensive definition of co-op, but I just really wanted to highlight that co-op is a very specific form of work-integrated learning. In Canada, we have a national definition and accreditation standards and process for co-op. That makes us very unique in the world and gives us some sort of national consistency that we don't see very often in the education space. So the National Association Cooperative Education Work-integrated learning defines the accreditation criteria. Co-op programs require multiple paid work experiences, a minimum duration of 12 weeks or 420 hours, and 30% of the time spent in the academic program needs to be spent in work experience, unless it's a program of 2 years or less, in which case it's 25%. And co-op is often cited as the most robust and rigorous form of work-integrated learning. And if you're interested, there's a really neat set of outcomes for co-op from the National Commission for Cooperative Education, which is now defunct, but you can find it in the 2005 Learning from Experience report here at the University of Waterloo. Okay, so Nora also did us the great favor of working through the pair with you today. So we won't do that. We'll just highlight that what she was speaking about with the institutional level certainly echoes for the individual student experience. This is about ensuring that learning outcomes are understood and clearly articulated. It is about finding a way to give the students that meaningful, authentic experience where they have the opportunity to apply theory in a real-world context. there must be assessment of the learning, whether that is specific to broad employability, skill development, discipline-specific assessment, and then that R-word, reflection. We have to give the students an opportunity to connect that experience to their academic program, to their career goals, to the broader understanding of the way in which they engage with the world.
Okay, so just to sort of situate us where we've been, we started out with the benefits and challenges. We covered some of the definitions. We've given you resources that outline the different kinds of experiential learning. And now we want to leave you with some resources on how you can get started with experiential learning. Again, we don't expect this little session to, a dive deep. It's just an overview, but there are ways that you can engage, and that's what this coming year is all about through the Waterloo Experiential Learning place. We've got our communities of practice, as I mentioned in our first session. Great opportunity for you to, if you're just curious, to find out what your colleagues are doing, or if you want to share your experiences with it, or if you want to start talking about some ways you might address the challenges or really reap the benefits. We've got the EL Institute, the Waterloo ExL Institute, happening on February 25th and March 4th, where you take a really deep dive, hopefully with some colleagues, and really think about how you can put that experiential learning into the curriculum. You'll get a lot of support and guidance, time and space over the 2 days to do that. You can check out some of the resources that we currently have on the CTE website. And again, as I mentioned, we've got our experiential learning leads and committee members who will be developing further resources that we'll be adding. And we also are starting the development of an experiential learning inventory. So this is a way for us to really pinpoint the kinds of activities that are happening here on campus and identifying where it's taking place, when it's taking place. Not only is this good at an institutional level, but we hope that students then will be able to find out where can they actually use, sign up for courses or opportunities that will help them participate in experiential learning. And I'm just thinking now that we've heard from the industry partner, it might be a great resource for the industry partners to look at to find out, oh gee, I might be able to work with this particular group of people, make those connections. So that wraps up what we wanted to talk about today. What burning questions or what comments would you like to make before we wrap up and move on to our next session? Yes. You'll forget by the time we get the mic over there.
Thanks. I just stepped out for a phone call quick, so I'm sorry if this was mentioned, but I've seen that different universities sometimes have different sort of operational definitions of what they conceptualize as experiential learning. I'm just, for clarity's sake, does Waterloo have that, or is it the MTCU definition that's sort of like the standard that we have here?
I'm going to say that's a big hard no. We don't have an one that a Waterloo definition. Anne, do you want to add anything to that?
I understand anecdotally that this was part of the strat plan conversations, and that there was not. The deans were not able to come to consensus on a definition of experiential. So for what it's worth, we used the Association for Experiential Education as a definition when we were doing the original sort of data collection for EDGE, and it seemed to be well received. But I think it would be great if we could move towards some institutional approval on this.
And I think, though, Stefan has raised points too. Like you talk about, it's hard for you to integrate an experiential learning into the curriculum. So what you might refer to as experiential learning, might be really low-hanging fruit for another group. So, it's just trying to accommodate all the different pieces that make up our university.
I just have a comment and maybe a question. First of all, I came into this session thinking that I knew what experiential learning was, and it's clear that obviously I didn't, so it was very well done, so thanks very much. I'm interested in the MTCU definition here. It says the student is in a workplace or a simulated workplace. What's an example of a simulated workplace?
Okay, wasn't involved in the conversation, but a place that I could think about would be, I'm going to turn to Ken. Maybe they have to actually do the same steps that they would do in a workplace environment, maybe doing body fat measurements or something like that. It might be under a simulated kind of environment, but it doesn't have that third-party industry person, and it also does not have the really consequences. But I don't know, Anne, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Another example that comes to mind, there's actually a presentation on right now. Dorothy Hadfield does English 210F, and the students are, throughout the entire course, given a role within an association or organization that they are then given tasks that they need to complete. It's a business communications course, and so that would be a simulated work environment. It is very messy. I was part of a 14 university project to come up with a common typology for experiential learning in the province. And you can only imagine how heated the conversations were with what does and doesn't count. And I guess the good news with the lack of guidance from the government is that we expect that there's at least an opportunity to revisit the conversation. It might be shut down entirely, so that might be the end of that. But hopefully there's an opportunity to try and come up with a slightly more clearly defined definition of experiential. Any other questions?
Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little. The experiential learning inventory you mentioned, that sounds amazing. I'm just curious if you can expand on what that is, where that will be, and how others will be able to access it or use it.
All good questions. I think it's just in the early stages, but Anne is doing a bit. She can talk about this. And one of our experiential learning leads, Jen Lyons, is also going to be doing some work. I think one of the challenges I found is trying to connect all the dots. I found out that Jen's interested in doing it, and at the same time, one of their teaching fellows was doing another little piece of it. And then we find out that Anne's doing quite a major one. So do you want to say a bit about that, Anne?
Sure. So we also received some career-ready funding to get this inventory. So we have some dedicated resources to work with our associate deans who are helping us to go through essentially the course calendar, looking at the requirements for an experiential learning course according to our MTCU definition, using the typology that was created in that 14 university project that I referenced. And so we hope to have an up-to-date inventory to at least have a report to the campus. Where it goes from there remains to be seen. Those are some bigger questions of, are we going to be required to report on this in an ongoing basis to the ministry? If so, then we need a better process for collecting and updating this data. And we don't want it to get out of date very quickly, so we need to come up with the solution for how we record and then share that. Those questions haven't been answered at this point.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that I understand what you are saying. Are you saying that in Canada, experiential learning is more of a generic term that would include all sorts of things like will and so on and so on? Is that the official standpoint within the country?
So I dare not make an official declaration for the country, but broadly, experiential is understood to be an umbrella term that encompasses a number of experiences, including work-integrated learning, and then from within their co-op. So does that answer your question?
I've just put the egg back up again. It might.
It's the big circle. Yeah. We understand experiential to be hands-on, direct experience for our students, authentic experiences for our students. So.